Denmark's youth delegates, and we would like to congratulate you on being here for the launch of the European Youth Delegates Vision. That was a short name I could get into the title of this event. We will take you through today, where we will have a short introduction by David that will talk about how it came to be, how we have developed through the Climate Youth Delegates Network, and then we will have 3 short sessions with some EU youth delegates and negotiators coming with their thoughts about some of the priorities in the policy brief. I have lost my papers, so I'll be very young and looking at my notes at my phone. So that's the reason why I'm going a bit back and forth. But I would firstly like to invite David, the Austrian youth delegate, to the scene.
Thank you so much, Sigurd. Hi, everyone. So good to see you all. Such a pleasure to be here. And I'm one of the senior youth delegates from Austria. This sounds like a contradiction, senior youth delegates. How does that work? But that just means that our youth delegate program, like many, is a 2-year program where we get to now spend some lovely time with 2 new youth delegates, one of whom is here today as well, Teresa, who will be speaking on mitigation just later. And the 2-year program has now brought me into the wonderful position to be able to talk a bit about how this network and how this position paper came to be that we're about to hear about. And so this is the perfect day, I think, to do this, because today in the morning in the coordination meeting of the EU, we as youth delegates were allowed to present our positions and talk to negotiators about the priorities for this first week of COP29. And afterwards, my head of delegation came up to me and was like, David, how do you feel? How does it feel after 2 years seeing all of this sort of come to life? Which has made me sort of a very proud, I don't know how you'd call it, not bad, but like proud senior youth delegate moment. Because really this network has been in the works for a while, and it's quite incredible and quite touching, to be honest, to see how it has grown in just the last 2 years. Because I remember back then, 2 years ago, when this was really just like a loose WhatsApp group of some people that we could sort of find with party badges that had an EU country on them, or a European country, I should say. And we put them all in the WhatsApp group, and then very spontaneously we tried to sort of formulate joint positions during, I think it was SB, I don't know, 56 back then, or whatever it was. And I remember still being on the train at night at 3 a.m. in the morning. We just wrote some things in a position paper. Then we sort of hurriedly tried to get the people in the WhatsApp group to agree with our positions that we had written. And then we could present it to the EU the next day. That was sort of how it started. And of course, since then, our process has become much more professional, where we actually now start working on these positions much earlier, because we also realized, well, actually, coming to these conferences with positions is one thing, but really we need to start much earlier to actually influence EU decision-making and influence the council conclusions. And so I'm very proud of what the network has achieved this year, which is really have a position paper very early on in the year, which has then enabled many of us to comment very productively, I think, on the council conclusions and provide input at various meetings on the EU level, and has hopefully also brought some sentences on human rights, on intergenerational equity, and of course on the substance issues, right, on mitigation, on NCQG, on so many important issues at COP29 into the EU's position. It's hopefully influenced negotiators to be as productive as possible in working for intergenerational justice at this COP29. And so with that, I'm very proud of what this network has done. I'm very excited to see where it will be in 2 years, given where we were 2 years ago. And with that, I'd hand it over to the youth delegates to really talk about the substance. But first, back to you, Sigurd.
Thank you, David. I know that don't want to hear myself twice. I know that you say that it's contradictory to be both senior and a youth delegate, but I see you as the network's grand old man. So I think it is fine that way. And the way you talked, I think, reflected that. So firstly, we would like to talk about mitigation. We will have NCQG and then just transition afterwards. So I would like to invite Teresa Oehlinger and Barbara Botas to the scene, the Austrian UNFCCC youth delegate and the Hungarian ambassador at large for climate. Give them a great applause. So what we will be doing here as a quick start is that we will react to some of the key points in the policy brief that I have here behind me. I think you can react with not really what we want to see, somehow what we want to see, and that is great. And I know for the youth delegates. So so it's not just boring and just going like this. You can start with this, then 2 thumbs up, and then a heart, and you can choose if you do like the old one or this one or like the big one. But yeah, there's various ways of reacting. So okay, let's try with the first one. The EU must stop all fossil fuel expansion and align with IPCC findings. Yeah, also Barbara? Ah, nice. Then we have reduce methane emissions by 45% by 2030 with better reporting on leakages. Yeah, okay. There's some difference there. Promote low carbon lifestyle, less meat, more public transport, and rail over air travel. Great. Okay, we had a lot of different hearts over there from the youth. That's lovely to see. So I'll ask you, Barbara, the thing about reducing methane emissions by 45%, that wasn't really something that you were that happy with. Maybe you wanted a bigger number? That would be great. Maybe it's...
Yes, now you can hear me. I can hear myself. So it doesn't mean I'm not happy. I'm a bit realistic. So even the global methane pledge is like 30%, and we are not there yet. We have a methane regulation, so it's something that we should achieve, but being realistic. And when we talk about fossil fuel expansion, I mean, I don't know how many of you were listening to the president of Azerbaijan yesterday at the opening ceremony. His first sentence was that from the 10 countries who have access to the gas pipelines of Azerbaijan, 8 are Europeans. That was a very strong message, and this is basically Russian gas. So let's not have illusions. I mean, because of the energy crisis that we had after COVID and then the geopolitical conflict, of course, every European country, even Hungary, is working on the diversification and the decreasing of gas supply of Hungary by demand side and all kinds of measures. But this is not going to happen from one day to the other. So
I think it talks into the thing about how progressive we can be and how ambitious we should be when setting these goals. Teresa, I know that you would like to talk a bit about the EU NDCs, also something that we would like to discuss. So far there, the methane emissions are not included either. Is it something that should be that? And what about the NDC? Like, how ambitious should we be?
Okay, does it work?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I think regarding methane emissions, I think this would be a great way to kind of make big steps and big emission cuts with, that can be seen very quickly. But of course, I think it's also important to regard all greenhouse gases. This is why we're also demanding that all greenhouse gases and sectors are going to be covered in the EU's NDC. And we as youth, we just think it's very important that the EU comes forward with their NDC very soon, because you can't really demand mitigation actions from other countries without leading ourselves. And I think it's very important that the EU publishes their target and shows actual climate leadership.
Maybe you have a short comment on that, Barbara. There were some figures about a 90-95% earlier this year. Is it something that we should just implement when science says it?
1995, I thought it was 90.
I think it was 90 to 95.
No, but the Commission was recommending 90 from the range. So this was option 3. And yeah, which is the most ambitious option from the 3. But in the February Commission communication, it was 90%.
I think I have slightly different numbers about a EU expert group from at Science saying 90 to 95, but that may be...
Yeah, but from the range, they were recommending. The recommendation for the EU is 90 from the range. But you are right, the target option is a range. But actually, these are all connected. I mean, methane is a tricky stuff. I mean, we have 3 sources of methane. So basically waste, but also we have agriculture, not an easy trick to reduce. But also we have mines and a lot of gas leakage. So we have leaking methane as well from all the drilled oil and gas holes that actually we have. But I mean, this is not an easy cake to do that, for sure. But if you have a look at the two recommendations, I mean, eating less meat can already bring us closer to the second one. So they are all interconnected. And of course, yesterday there was a huge methane day, and probably you saw the China announced that they are going to measure methane from the space, actually. And that's also something that is, I think it's one step ahead, because if you have a look at the Chinese target, it's a 30-60 target. So they will peak by 30, and then they will have climate neutrality by 60. But this NDC that they have now doesn't talk about methane, only CO2. The question is, and this is where youth engagement should happen, if the new NDC of China is going to include methane or not. Because in China, that's a bulk of the emissions, and there is a lot to do. But also in the EU, of course.
Definitely. I think we all have a lot to do. It's difficult to find anyone that doesn't. You touched about the low carbon lifestyles, which is also one of the recommendations. I don't know if you would like to elaborate a bit on how our policy brief talks about this, Teresa, and why it's important.
Yes, I would like to comment on that, because I've seen also in the audience some young people not 100% agreeing with that. And I would say I understand, because I feel like within the climate movement, when you get active as a young person, you oftentimes hear, okay, but start with yourselves. Like, are you taking the public transport to school, or are you recycling? And while to some extent I understand that it's important that everybody thinks about their choices, I also think that it's very important to kind of move from the individual responsibilities to like the political responsibilities. I think that's also kind of what was meant when we promote low carbon lifestyles in the policy brief, because it's very important that the EU and also political leaders on the European level start promoting low carbon lifestyles, but also make political choices that make it easier to live more sustainably. And this starts with like phasing out of fossil fuels and etc.
Yeah.
So I really think it's very important for political leaders to actually take choices that are good for climate negotiations.
Yeah, how do we do that? Like, there's a figure that is just usually so difficult for me to understand, that when it comes to traveling across Europe, which many of us love to do because we love to engage and connect with our European friends, as a reason why we formed this union back in the days, but it's often cheaper to travel by train than by air travel. I don't know if you have some ideas on how we can change that. I can ask both of you if you have.
Two answers. I think all of you are familiar with the global footprint analysis, which was done by Matthijs Wackernagel and William Ruiz. And you know, basically you can count the global acres that you occupy with your consumption. But do you also know who ordered that? The fossil fuel industry, because they wanted to shift responsibility to individuals, to consumers, but also, of course, it backfired. Because, oh yeah, I have a global footprint. People started calculating it, but then we just pushed back the responsibility to fossil fuel industry. So it was not a good thing to do. But if I have a look at the per capita head emissions of Hungary, it's 5.6 tons per head per year. In the EU, it's 8 tons per head per year. For France, it's almost 10 tons per head per year. For the US, 17. For Canada, 21. And for the oil-producing countries, it can go up to 50, 60 tons per head per year. And for the Paris Agreement, 1.5, everybody should have 2 tons per head per year. And now we can start calculating. So what do you want? I mean, if I eat meat with meat, that's what Hungarians do. I'm sorry, but that's how we work. I mean, it was during the, we were protecting all of you from the Turkish. For 150 years, we had Turkish people who were burning the fields. That's why we could only eat meat. Since that time, we eat a lot of meat in Hungary. 150 years of Turkish, but that's 2.3 tons per head per year already. What if I go a little bit vegetarian? I can push it down to 1.3 and I still have 0.7 to travel. Not bad. What if I go local and vegan? I can push it down to 0.7 tons per head per year, and still I have 1.3, which is legally okay to meet the Paris Agreement. And that's good. I don't need to sacrifice all my lifestyles, and I don't need to have anxiety because of that, because I have a budget of 2 tons per year per head. So let's play with the numbers, and let's not use this Wackernagel global acres anymore, because
I'm happy that you both mention the importance of this, but also that it's always important that we push back to it being a structural problem and not something that we should take on ourselves, because it has been the idea of some big corporations to just punish and make a guilt. Give the guilt to the people. And that's
and if
not
I
how we
can go back to IPCC,
yes,
clearly.
I want to say, when I look at this,
Yeah.
I don't understand why this is like, why haven't we just done this? Like, how can this still be a thing?
I mean, just IPCC said as well that, I mean, it's a triangle of inaction. So we have the governments, we have the individuals, and we have the companies. And we cannot we cannot always blame and shame and finger point at the others, because IPCC says we need systematic change. If we just say that consumers need to do more, governments need to do more, companies, that's not good, because that's only a zero-sum game. And in a zero-sum game, it's always the vulnerable who lose, the poorest who are most exposed to the effects of climate change. But if we have systematic change, it's more than the sum of the parts. That's what the IPCC says. Systematic change is something that more than what we can do individually, plus the government, plus the companies, because that's the way ahead.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have some comments on that. I would also really like to touch upon the thing on fossil fuels up here. The first one, as I said, get confused like why that isn't just implemented. Why this is still a thing, that we are still giving subsidies to fossil fuels and still opening new fossil fuel plants within the EU?
I would say I agree that we need change that really goes down to system change, and we need to actually change probably everything that we're doing right now. But right here at COP, I think it's also very important to use the channels that we're given, or that the EU is given, to actually negotiate for very strong outcomes. And I think, there are some critics of the EU that kind of have a point. Like Sigurd said, we must stop all fossil fuel expansion in order to align. And I think there is a lot that can be done within the EU to work on mitigation, like the fossil fuel subsidies, and also to make living more sustainable, which is something we can do also easier for people living here, like the traveling by train or by planes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that'll be the words for now. Teresa Oehlinger, Barbara Botov, give them a big, great applause. Barbara will be back later, but they'll go down now. Then I would like to see Anne Van Bergen, the Belgian youth delegate, and Emilia Mariendahl, the EU lead on NCQG on stage. Give them a round of applause as well. To talk about finance, specifically the NCQG. So we'll do the same as before. Can I just see that you know how it works? Like, how do you know the different signs you should do? Yeah, can I see them?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, it's more simple for you. I hope it'll be fine. Okay, so let's start from the top. The NCQG should adopt the polluter pays principle and treat the biodiversity crisis equally to the climate crisis. Oh, okay, two on the side, yes. The subsidies for fossil fuels and emission-heavy industries should align with climate goals. Great heart there, Dan. Secure funding to address losses and damages, ensuring it reaches vulnerable groups like marginalized communities, women, and indigenous peoples. Okay, great. I saw that there were not agreement on all of these. We had something about the NCQG should adopt the polluter pays principle, where the EU was not aligned with the youth. What do you have to say about that, Emilia?
No, I would like to clarify my response, because the first first of all, I agree, but I think that it's more nuanced.
Oh, it's about the biodiversity crisis, yes.
No, it's about the fact that I think it's more nuanced than just a polluter pays principle, for example. I do agree that there is a dimension of polluter pays principle that we want to see reflected in the NCQG, definitely. We also think that we need to treat the biodiversity crisis at equal stage. The same with the other conventions. We also have the desertification and the plastic treaty. So we definitely see that we need to treat them more in synergy instead of working that much in silos. That's also why we think of the NCQG more of like a framework, kind of having a more holistic approach to financing climate action, but in synergy with that, and also in accordance with Article 2 in general, which also is about poverty eradication and it's about sustainable development. So yes, I do believe that we should adopt the polluter pays principle, but I also think that there's an ability to pay that plays into
As
this.
a political?
Ability to pay, so not simply just the polluter pays.
Okay, great. Lisa and I, the Danish youth delegates, have just been to the Biodiversity COP here, which took place 2 weeks ago. And there's a very clear mandate to try to integrate some of the climate crisis into the biodiversity and see how they can align, like the solutions to them can align, not the crisis. And some of them over there sometimes feel that they're trying more to bridge the gap than at climate, and I think that may be a problem. I don't know if you see some of the same difficulties, Dan, or that the solutions to some of these crises could align.
Wait, you mean about the first one, right?
Biodiversity and climate, yeah, the first one.
Yeah, I was wondering, what does the EU think about creating specific sub-goals, and also not a specific sub-goal for biodiversity, but at least mentioning that biodiversity should also be a priority? Is it something like a specific sub-goal, for example, about loss and damage? Is that something you would support?
From our side, sorry, I don't know. Do you hear me well? Yeah, okay.
I'm the only one that can't. I just stand here.
You can creep in. Okay, so 2 things. On first, biodiversity. I think you would see that there's a new text out for the NCQG, which we are meeting in a contact group on later this afternoon. In that draft, there is now, I'm sorry, I can hear that it's scratching, at least in mine.
Oh, yeah, there's this mic. Some technical problems is a part of all side events.
Thank you. Oh, sorry for that. Don't know how I did that. No, there's a new text out from the co-chairs, the first iteration of a draft decision text for NCQG, and in there we haven't gone through it all, and I'm not sure you have, so it's not because we need to go into the technical details or specifics, but at least there is a paragraph speaking to the synergies, but I know it's on the context, so it's a very context-specific element. It might not be that operationalized yet. So there I totally agree with you that we are maybe struggling to figure out how the links work. Just from the Danish side, I'm from Denmark myself, the people that go to the CBD, the Biodiversity COP, are not the same people who are here. So that's also just a structural problem in terms of ensuring that that link is created. So very happy maybe also to turn the question to you and ask if you have any ideas on how to improve those synergies. On sub-goals in general, I think our approach is that we see it more as like, without a sub-goal, we see it more as a layer. So I think we're just viewing it from a different angle more. So we are looking at
the onion.
It has many names. We introduced the onion. It was previously a broccoli and an artichoke. I also introduced the avocado, so can be many things. We are not wedded to either one of them. In general, I don't think that sub-goals is the right way to go. We're definitely listening to the request and the intent of what is being asked with the sub-goal. We understand in particular also for adaptation with the 100 billion goal we've had a doubling of the level of finance from 2020. And of course we see that came about because we did not manage to mobilize enough funds for adaptation action in general. So we do see the need to address that somehow in this goal. I think what we consider sub-goals might differ a little bit between parties. I think there are some interesting ideas, not particularly in my understanding of like a top-down sub-goal, but more on looking at package elements of adaptation. What can we say about the quality of finance in particular for adaptation? Do we want to look at some kind of floor, for example? Stuff like that, so more cross-cuttingly.
Thank you. Just mentioning some of the points that were said. Totally agree. Great one to look out for. And then the part about Danish negotiators not being the same, and that's not just due to the Danish delegation, that's due to all European delegations. Lisa and I have been keeping an eye out, except for Lisa and I, that are the same going across. So we'll try to bind the two together, but it is a small army that we're building up, just the two of us.
We are a small army in principle.
Maybe that'll be our Instagram tag, the small army. I want to come back to you about some of the things that Emilia said about the sub-goals, because I think that there is an agreement also in the European Youth Delegates group about that we need to see this avocado approach, or we need to see different layers of it, but there's also some concerns about how it's done in the best ways. I think you had some points on it earlier.
Yeah, an important one is that it's all grant-based. That there's a strong core that it's grant-based, public financing, and you mentioned like, yeah, okay, there's limited funding in Western countries or in global North countries. But I think that's also a question of political willingness. We now, yeah, you also mentioned it. So instead of polluters pay, it's now sometimes we pay the polluters. So we could shift this principle into something we want to see. And for example, also taxing the rich would provide a lot of money. If you have a 60% income tax for the top 1% earners, it would generate 6.4 trillion per year. So it's not that there is not money, it's just like, okay, where do we get it? Like, and do we want it to get it there? And of course, you need to take into account the most vulnerable people, but you can also make an exemption for example, the lowest incomes, and have a higher tax on fossil fuels for the users, like big companies or things like that. So I think it's a political question more, and not that the money isn't there.
It's definitely a political question, and seeing some of the finance ministers from Germany, Portugal, and Brazil also just proposing a 1% billionaire tax, how much money that can generate is very nice to see, and we hope that the EU and other countries are supporting this. So,
can I maybe just come in with a quick comment? So, I don't think I did say that there are restricted budgets, but I totally agree with that. No, so there is something about that. I totally also agree that we need to look at where the grant-based financing is targeted towards, because right now we might not be using all of the different instruments in the best way possible. So in our view, we should still use all sources of finance. I think they each have their respective strengths and weaknesses, but not all other instruments like grants are necessarily poor at tackling some of these challenges. So that's just a first point. And then on innovative instruments in particular, I think from our side we're really interested in exploring that. It's more on a member state level in the European Union, so it's something that we are keen on exploring from at the European level, but the engagement has so far at least been more on member state level, but I know that there's quite a few countries engaged in that.
About the taxation? Or was
different different forms of levies.
Of levies, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
When it comes to taxation, Denmark is quite good. So many countries that doesn't even have a minister for it. We have a minister just doing taxation because we love it so much.
Recently heard when I introduced two colleagues I have here at COP, they're from our tax ministry. Someone looked at me and said, "That's the most Danish thing I've ever heard, to have a tax ministry." Yeah.
Yeah, I was also at a green taxation seminar last year, and they were together with the Dutch taxation minister, and they were just so happy to have a colleague out there in the world because there are so few. Before we end, I want to touch a bit on the last one, where we talk about how we can make these funds available for marginalized groups and communities. It is extremely difficult as they also usually have less resources to reach out to these funds. This is a way that we can secure that in a properly manner. Asking both of you, you can take the floor.
Yeah, what I personally think is that you should make it as easy as possible to apply for these grants and not make it a process that takes 7 years and or is only possible for big governments with more funding. So would make it as accessible as possible, and also not maybe only to countries but also to small communities that are really in need of this climate finance, like microfinancing, for example.
Go back to you, Emilia.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for raising that point as well. And I think there are 2 points in that point. The first one maybe, which we also talked a little bit about before, loss and damage. I think exactly also innovative instruments can be quite key in that, in terms of generating finance for loss and damage in particular. So just wanted to make that point. And then in terms of vulnerable groups, marginalized communities, women and indigenous peoples, and I would like to add as well gender responsive financing to that. That's
Great one.
Yeah, thank you. That's all elements that we would like to see reflected as well in general across the financing agenda, but also in the NCQG. I'm sorry that it messes a little bit. Okay. We are definitely looking at how to integrate that. And I think so far in what we've seen on the NCQG, it's been mostly in context sections, but it's not been operationalized or contextualized in the text. So that's something that we are working on together with our partners from other groups and other groups of parties to look at what we actually would like to see there. For access in particular, I think there's a lot of requests for more direct access. I think that's a very interesting thing to look at, but it requires looking at the different channels, looking at the different channels as well, harmonization of procedures and regional allocations and stuff like that, for example, in the funds. So there's a lot of different ways we could look at it, but we're very
Thank you very much.
So.
Dan Vandenberge and Emilia Meindal, give them a great round of applause. And I can also just mention, because Emilia didn't get to it, that there's Pink Day tomorrow. Emilia is the biggest advocate for wearing pink. She won, I wasn't sure if there was a prize, but she won that having the most pink on bag and bun when we had this. So I have a pink suit for tomorrow, so I'm trying to challenge her, but we'll see how well that goes. Moving on to the next session, we are having Barbara Botos back on stage, Hungarian ambassador at large, and Sarah Nasrani, the UN Youth Representative of Sustainable Development of the Netherlands. Give them a great round of applause. So now we've had something about mitigation, we have heard about NCQG and finance, but how do we bind all of these things together so we actually get the just transition that we would like, that we will try to explore in the next 10 minutes. So I'll start as before. You remember the different signs? Yeah, you're all good? Okay, so the first one being the green transitions must not be built on the exploitation of resources and people in developing countries. Oh yeah, Barbara also found the heart, that's great. Then we have address the energy poverty by supporting vulnerable households. Oh yeah, and being very young there, that's good to see. And the last one being ensure just transitions across all sectors, especially high emission industries. Great. I see no. Okay, okay. There was some disagreement at the last one. Maybe we should start with that one. Ensure just transitions across all sectors, especially high emission industries. Maybe you would say a bit about why that's important, Sarah.
Yeah, of course. So usually I've spoken to multiple EU negotiators on just transitions, and the focus is very much on the energy sector, which I completely understand. Like, we cannot have a sustainable transition, we cannot have a just transition without including the energy sector. But I think we all understand that it is so much broader than that, and just speaking from the context of this people I speak to back home, there's so much going on in different sectors that are also mobilized to cut their emissions and to completely change the way these sectors have moved, completely change the way people have lived their livelihoods. For example, the agricultural sector. This is a huge issue in the Netherlands. And I think this is a very highly emissive sector, but it's not the energy sector. So we need to look at this in a broader sense for
a just transition not to become something of the energy elite, which at this point it kind of sounds like for a lot of people I speak to.
Sounds great. Coming back to the agricultural sector that Barbara also touched upon earlier, we know we use quite a lot of the European budget on subsidies for the agricultural sector, so I guess there's room there to use those money to send them in a direction that we would actually like to see the sector developing in. Do you have some comments on that as well? And what Sarah said, mainly not what I'm
There's
saying.
some confusion on just transitions. What do we mean by just transitions? It's definitely not energy transition, and you were right in that. But the social and the economic impacts of energy transition, that is just transition, and that can happen in any sector. It's not only in the hard-to-abate sectors and the energy industry, but if you have a look at the just transition program in the EU, and in most of the EU countries, we have counties actually which receive just transition funds. So we, even in the EU, we have to deal with just transition, but where? That's the question. Which regions get the money? In those where you have either hard-to-abate industrial sectors like cement industry, steel industry, or you have energy industry, which you have to phase down or make it from brown to green. But in the meantime, you have to tackle problems of social and economic issues. Like you have to retrain people, you have to upskill people, you have to, for example, just one example, like in my country, we have a lignite-powered power plant, lignite-powered power plant. So that's one company, only 2,000 people. But we need to take care of those 2,000 people. Let's move to South Africa. There are 100,000 people working in a mine. That's a different scale, but we have to take care of them. And this is not the end of the story yet, because in Hungary we have an average of 1 or 2 kids. In South Africa, so it means that a family of 10,000 people should be taken care of. But in other countries, when you have a family of 6, 7, 8, immediately you arrive 1 million people who have to be taken care of when you phase down a coal-fired power plant and you close the mines. And it's not only upskilling, but and one more, in this power plant, it's one issue, we are going to phase it down, but there are 1,000 SMEs which supply to this power plant. But these SMEs can be restaurants, these can be shops, hairdressers, or anybody providing services to these power plants. But what will happen if there is no power plant anymore, but there will be renewable energy in its place? That's what we plan, for example. Then we need to reskill and show these SMEs, 1,000 SMEs in Hungary, how to adapt to new circumstances. So that's a just transition. And I mean, we need just transition where we have the high emitters, and also agriculture, as you said. In agriculture, you might also need.
Sarah
if
has
I
a
can
point.
just respond to that, because I agree, and there's very many anecdotes you bring to the conversation that are very relevant. But I'm not sure if we're in a position where you can say that is a just transition, because there's so many different perspectives on what a just transition is, and we cannot as a EU decide on what that means. A just transition also goes across borders, and I feel like that is something that we hear a lot from youth from the Global South as well. I feel like there's so many discussions on what is it? Is a just transition just for the energy sector within our own countries, or is it also about spillover effects transnationally? It is both. It is all of it. And we're not going to agree on what justice is. We might not always agree on what a transition is, but we really have to be aware maybe of saying this is what a just transition is, because we are disrespecting very many people to whom that is not the complete truth.
But I mean, what I said, just transition is not energy transition. And that's the key. That was my sentence. It's about the social economic impacts of energy transition. That's why we provide the Just Transition Work Program to those sectors where it comes with that. That's it. Just transition is about basic human rights.
Yes, but those don't stop within borders.
I didn't say that it stops at borders.
I see some agreement up there on some topics, but I want to come back to what Sarah said before on how just transition is viewed in the Global South, and how we, with the way we act, can still try to help make a just transition there, even though it is without our outside of our national legislation. It seems like quite a mouthpiece to actually get to do that. But what is the best way to do so to make sure that we secure just transition without our own borders?
I mean, it is very difficult, but I think we can start by mapping what those impacts are on other communities and also communicating that better. There's the spillover indexes that have shown that there's a lot of spillover effects of our green transitions into developing countries. The Netherlands is doing very poorly on that range, and I think we can start there. But for example, there's also maybe one very concrete example is that when we within the emission trading system within the EU, the benefits financially are spent on projects within the EU. And I think this is a very interesting case because it shows that we're trying to make a transition just by making sure that the financial benefits of having a scheme like this comes to the most vulnerable, but it's the most vulnerable within the EU, and it invests in projects within the EU when a lot of the impacts are outside of it. So we can maybe reimagine such structures as well.
Reimagining, Barbara, is that something that you would like to see as well?
Well, the carbon border adjustment mechanism is an EU climate policy, but we spend the bulk of the money for other countries to be able to live with it. Because as you might have seen, the Agenda 5 was partly about what they call the unilateral measures. I don't think CBAM or the deforestation regulation of the EU is a unilateral measure. Unilateral measures are the ones which are using trade relations and misusing other countries to get richer. But CBAM, deforestation regulation, waste shipment regulation, eco-label is a climate regulation. And me as the EU should not be ashamed of being green, not using child work, not destroying biodiversity, and not emitting CO2, because I want to protect industry. I don't want those industries to compete with European industries which are constantly abusing human rights and so on. So I think this is the message that we are like trying to convey, and constantly in the biodiversity COP, in the climate COP, this topic is coming in. This is not a trade measure. This is climate and environmental policy of the EU. And yes, please look at how we are doing, because you are going to go through it. You are going to go through all these regulations, and just transition is going to be a problem in all countries. We are just showing one model that you could copy if you like it, if not. But we don't want to make other countries' life a nightmare with CBAM and deforestation regulation, because we work for these values which are important even in this convention.
I'm very happy to see your passion there, Barbara, when it comes to how we can try to do something better outside of the European borders. And again, as we said, Lisa and I both go to climate, biodiversity, but actually also plastics. And CBAM is always mentioned in all of these spaces because it is something that people have very strong opinions about. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to touch upon the thing about supporting vulnerable households when it comes to energy poverty. I know it's not truly connected to what we were just talking about, but I just want to hear if you have if you can elaborate a bit on why that's important.
I think it is very connected, and just to give some context, when I'm not a youth representative, I'm an energy fixer, which is my part-time job, which means that I spend 2 to 3 days a week throughout my entire life going to people's houses, talking to them about the energy bill and helping them for free. It's a paid for by the government project to isolate their homes. And it is a huge part of this just transition and this inclusive transition that we need. Because what I realize when I speak to people who suffer from energy poverty is that most of them say climate policy is not about me at all. It is the people who earn the least who are also, once again, in the least isolated homes. And it actually also reminded me of the discussion we had during the mitigation discussion. In the Netherlands, for example, because of tax exemptions and because of fossil fuel subsidies, the average household actually pays more for gas than companies do. I mean, we just need to let that sink in for a little bit. They literally pay more per unit than big companies do. So it's almost like a deal, the more you consume, that the cheaper it's going to be. And we need to completely turn this around. And this shows that a just transition is so much more than this. A just transition is also communicating to these people. There's so many people I speak to with an immigration background who have language barriers. We have all these systems on just transitions, for example, to help people, but if you don't understand it or if you don't trust institutions, you are the most vulnerable, but once again, it doesn't respond to you. So I think it is very crucial, and also for creating the sense among communities that we need these people. These are oftentimes people that are practically educated. These are people that maybe in elections go more to the far right because they believe that the climate parties are not about them, and they have a point in a way. So I think addressing energy poverty and supporting the most vulnerable households is crucial if we want a just transition, because if we don't have a fast transition, it won't be a just transition for anyone, and therefore we need all these people to join as well, but they can't.
I think that's a very strong message to end on. Sarah Nasravi and Barbara Botas, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for everyone here. Thank you. Just want to wrap up and say the policy brief is not the ending point. It's a starting point for conversation that we will have here at COP, and we are very happy to engage with every one of you about this going forward. Thank you very much.
Passive, yeah. I work with colleagues because, you know, the European rhetoric is wrong. So let's
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session on climate change impacts on Saami reindeer pastures, digitalizing indigenous knowledge for empowerment. Today we're exploring how climate change is affecting Saami cultures, livelihoods and society with a focus on reindeer herding. This session is organized by the Saami Council and the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. Please stick to the end, where we will have a Q&A session where our experts can answer your titillating questions. So please leave those questions to the end. To start, we are honored to have Gun-Britt Retter, head of the Arctic and Environmental Unit at the Saami Council, who will share insights on climate change impacts on Saami society. Please, Gun-Britt, come here up on the stage. The floor is yours. There, you can sit there. Oh, let me help you.
Okay. Oops. I forgot.
It does not. It's on.
Oh yeah. So I am not supposed to be loud.
No.
Yeah. I forgot to review the room before I figured what items to use for this talk. The Arctic, as you know, is projected to become profoundly different in the near future under all warming scenarios. So climate change in the Arctic is already occurring at a magnitude and pace unprecedented in recent history and faster than projected for other world regions. This is probably what Rolf will tell later, because this is an AMAP finding that suggests that Arctic near-surface air temperature increased by 3 times the global average over the past 50 years, with annual averages increased by 3.1 degrees. Further to this, the annual emission gap report from this year, which takes stock of countries' promises to tackle climate change compared with what is needed, finds the world faces as much as 3.1 Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels by 2100 if governments do not take greater action on cutting emissions. This means that current climate policies will result in a global warming of more than 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century, which is more than twice the rise agreed by governments who signed up to Paris Agreement in 2015. So, and my concern is that this will result, looking 50 years back and looking into the future, so if it continues as the past 50 years, this will result in an absolutely devastating warming in the Arctic. I would reflect a little bit on Saami Council released a climate report last year, and this morning my inspiration was to talk about snow and ice, as this is also very important for the reindeer husbandry. Our Saami knowledge holder who is reindeer herder shared yesterday that the winter climate has become unpredictable, with fluctuating temperatures and unstable cold periods. This disrupts reindeer herding as ice-covered lichen becomes inaccessible, forcing herders to feed reindeer more often, and this is artificial feeding. Seasonal shifts delay reindeer mating and make gathering for autumn slaughter difficult. Extended mushroom season delay reindeer migration, and warmer winters prevent traditional migration paths across frozen waters. And spring now arrives earlier and unpredictably, which can result in calves being born in harsh conditions. And calves is the economy of a reindeer herder. So the Saami climate report, when we worked on that, One of the knowledge holders we interviewed in that occasion mentioned briefly his concern. No, that was not what I was going to say. That's why I wanted the computer. But what we see is also with these warming temperatures, we see greening in the Arctic. And part of the reason why we see this greening is the changing ice conditions on the river, was some of the elders that suggested. And I found this very fascinating, because what he says is that these ice flows, or these ice chunks, the huge ones, they usually drift down rivers like the Etno with enormous power that usually brings down riparian vegetation. I don't know what riparian is other than small, young, deciduous trees on the riversides. So warmer temperatures have changed the ice during spring breakup. And one of the knowledge holders said that, referring his father, and said that he used to say that a good ice slide is useful. It cleans the bottom of the river, the Etno. And now you see more biological mass. We have the invasive species of pink salmon that dies after spawning. And then you have the lack of ice flow, which is not cleaning up the biological material. And so he expects that all the sandbanks will be overgrown by grass and trees. And so soon they can't get down to the river without bringing a chainsaw. And they also concerned that the larger floods were getting rare. And floods also have a function. So even though you have sometimes very snow-rich winters, there is still no serious flooding in the spring. And that is several reasons for that. And one is that the ground does not freeze solidly before snow is setting, thus absorbing more of the meltwater in the spring. And another, which we heard 2 years ago in this event, was that if the ground doesn't freeze before the snow sets, you also get mold under the snow, which is not good grazing for the reindeer. And frost, they also suggested that warmer winters cause thinner ice, and some had experienced that frost during the snow melting period dries the snow and thus prevents large flooding. So there was a lot of observations about deteriorating ice quality, and also the snow situation of going earlier and going earlier in spring, setting later in the fall, that is impacting all the water system or humidity, and also reindeer husbandry and the conditions both for migration and for the vegetation. So for us then, from following up from the climate change report, we have that climate change report with all this knowledge on ice and snow and the different Saami livelihoods. So when we come and participate in these arenas, we think it's as climate change accelerates in the Arctic and Sapmi, causing severe disruptions and impacts to our ecosystems, livelihoods and economies, we call on the world leaders to take immediate and decisive action to address the full extent of this crisis impacting our homeland. So parties to the Climate Convention must commit to strengthen their ambitions and commitments, and communicate targets that reflect the urgency of action and implementation in line with an equitable global pathway to 1.5 degrees. Keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees with no or limited overshoot is essential for our existence as Arctic indigenous peoples. We have also several other recommendations, but I think this one linked to my opening with the concern of what the warmest year so far has shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Gun-Britt. We will now view a video titled Climate Impacts on Reindeer Herding. This video features insights from Anne-Maaret Lappa, Saami reindeer herder, highlighting the challenges Saami reindeer herders face today.
Herder. Nowadays, the effects of climate change are increasingly visible in our daily lives. The seasons are no longer the same. In autumn and winter, when it should be below zero and snow, it can now be above zero and rain. A month ago, we had about 25 centimeters of snow in 2 days. A few days later, the weather warmed up to plus degrees and the snow started to melt. Unfortunately, not all of the snow melted. Some of it turned to ice. It means that our reindeer are unable to reach the lichen under the ice. In an ideal situation, we would still have our traditional winter grazing areas left in the south. But we have lost those areas to competing land use, and we can no longer get there with our reindeer. How can we adapt to climate change when we don't have our traditional grazing areas and we are all the time losing more land, more grazing areas?
Powerful video. We are next. I'm going to introduce you to the CITE project and the Maptionnaire. The project Climate Change Impacts on Terrestrial Ecosystems, called CITE. Now it is in its final phase, and it has been launched through a collaboration between the Saami Council, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, called AMAP, Secretariat, and representatives from reindeer herding communities across Norway, Sweden and Finland, along with researchers from the Nordic countries. It focuses on monitoring and adapting to climate impacts in Saami reindeer herding communities. The project has co-designed a digital tool that the reindeer herders may use for observation on environmental changes, which bridges traditional knowledge and scientific data and enrich the collective understanding of climate impacts and thus aiding sustainable decision-making. This inclusion of local insights into climate resilience tools underscores the project's goal to make indigenous voices central in climate adaptation strategies. We will now have a video with Maaret Hetta, the project coordinator in the CITE project, demonstrating the online platform.
Boris, my name is Maaret Hetta, and I'm currently working at the Saami Council as a project leader for the CITE project. So in this video, I will demonstrate how the Maptionnaire tool that we co-designed works. So in collaboration with participants in the CITE project, the reindeer herders, researchers, and other knowledge holders, we designed a digital tool to document and map observations of weather and weather events and changes in biodiversity, and also competing land use. We use this Maptionnaire platform. It's an already existing survey tool, a map-based community engagement platform. So within this platform, we developed a questionnaire where the reindeer herders could report their observations. They could add pictures, videos. So here is the Maptionnaire tool, or the platform. So within this, we created our own survey that the reindeer herders could access to with a link. So when they go into the link, this window pops up, and this is a consent form, information about the project, and of course we follow the ethical research guidelines that the Saami Council has created and adopted. So when they've answered this form, they move on to the survey itself. So the first page is like an information or instruction page where they learn about the map and also how to put in their observations. So this map is the base of our survey. It's a map over Saami. And as you can see, there are no border lines between the countries. And this is because many of these districts, the reindeer herding districts, as you see here in orange lined up, they move across the borders for summer grazing areas and winter grazing areas. And this is how it traditionally has been before the border lines came. So now they can move on to the survey itself and put in their specific observations. So then it looks like this. And here are the observations page. And here they can put in observations within various of themes, like reindeer behavior and health, grazing conditions, snow and ice, weather, special events, and so on. And I can demonstrate how they can use these different things. I'm going to zoom in this so to where I am at right now, and it is where this orange dot is. So then when then I can put in an observation on weather. So here is the point. I put it right there, approximately where I am. And then this window pops up with follow-up questions. And here I can describe in detail about the weather. I can put in videos, files, pictures. I can also answer when on the calendar, what season it is in, spring, summer, autumn, so on, temperature, wind direction, strength, precipitation, and so on. And when I'm done with this, you click done, and then you have the observation right there. And all your observations will be saved on your map in your profile. So for barriers, you have the next option here. You can either put disturbances, competing land use, barriers to movement, reindeer loss, and so on. So if I put competing land use, I go here about where I'm at, zoom in a little. In Delegates on the Norway side of Saami, I put there, and it's an area I can mark and then describe what kind of land use it could be. So forestry, wind power, mining, hydropower, military areas, and so on. And then also in detail describe how it impacts the herding. So, and then it will be here saved in my profile. So thank you.
So there we had it, very important tools from the ground level that we can use in later on. Next, we'll watch a brief video featuring one of our reindeer herders, Mr. Lars Elias Brandfjell, sharing his experiences with the impacts on climate change, on reindeer herding, and the use of the tool.
Lars Elias Brandfjell, a reindeer herder in Norway, southern part of Saami. My reindeer community is named Saami, and we're 9 families together. Today I am outside with the reindeers. So the reindeers are close by to me now. I'm in the cabin, this meeting, warming myself a little bit. It's cold inside. So we have, because of the warmer climate, we have different insects, like ticks, and they can carry diseases as well. They crawl around in the vegetation, and we don't know how that's going in the long run. But we can notice that there is some type of insects that's more and more usual in this area as well. That's insects that's haven't been here. They have adapted before thousands of years, and they had time and space to do so. Now it's happening so fast. Where I'm living, where I have my reindeers. 50 years ago, old mines. That's not in use anymore. But since and now, today they can all the mines green. Various things we use green ships, batteries, etc. So they won't. Now they are taking tests, soil, find out what minerals can they use. So the mining industry has turned from being not good to be good. It's with just a single change of verbs. It's the same type of mine. That's a big threat for us as well. And we know that best thing we can do for the climate change is to preserve, take care of it. So I've been part of a group, reindeer herders and scientists. We've been designing an app called Reindeer. And with Reindeer, we can, when we're out in the field, we can registrate and document climate changes while we're outside with pictures and text and point it on our map so we know exactly where it is. That we can use for a research later on, and we the owners of the data, so it get this used by more people. That's always great for us. In the wrong hands. So when I'm outside, you don't have so much time always, but with the Maptionary, you can do the registration, visible climate change really fast. Just pick up phone, open the app, take a picture, plot it on the map, and describe. And when I go home, have some more time, I can fill in the details later on. So it will be quite useful for us to have a system. Yeah. I'm also looking forward to register some of the elders' observations. We have control over all knowledge and science. Like say, we have control over it, have possibility to register quite easy, and so it's a good experience for us as well, using further type of projects.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's give a big hand to Lars. Great demonstration from the actual reindeer herders themselves, the end user of this application. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Rolf Rödven, Executive Secretary at the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, who will discuss the broader impacts of climate change on Arctic ecosystems. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janne. I hope we can put up the slides there. Okay. Bore Beive, mon naam is Rolf Rödven, mon naam Danaseris, ja mon naam Sapelash. That was Saami, and it means my name is Rolf Rödven. I'm from Datno, a place which also was described earlier. I'm a Saami, but also happen to be the Executive Secretary of the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program. And the reason why I mention both, because this is also one that brings in some of the perspectives I have on this project and the versatility and use of co-produced knowledge. The Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program, or AMAP as I will say for short, is one of the working groups to the Arctic Council. And we have since 1991 been assessing and monitoring trends and levels of climate change and contaminants in the Arctic, how they affect ecosystems, as well as societies and humans, also through effects on human health, and how both climate and contaminants interact in what we call a multi-stressor way. I would like to start here to introduce you to the Arctic, because often when we speak about the Arctic, at least in particular people from the south think of it as a remote and deserted area, but it's not. The Arctic is a home to 4 million people, or we can define it up to 7 million people, depending on where you put the borders. There are more than 40 ethnic groups, and more than 9% of the people living in the Arctic define themselves to belong into one of those ethnic groups. 3/4 of the people living in the Arctic live in larger settlements, that is settlements more than 5,000 people, 5,000 inhabitants. But 90% of the settlements are small. And being here on the Nordic Pavilion, we have to remember that the Arctic, in a pan-Arctic sense, is very much unlike what we see in northern Norway, northern Sweden, or northern Finland. But it's very remote. A lot of those villages are very far distance from any kind of infrastructure. And also we have to remember that 64% of those settlements are on permafrost. So 2/3 of the settlements are directly affected by permafrost thaw we see today. The climate in the Arctic is changing rapidly. And today, just an hour ago, we presented the newest findings from our upcoming Arctic Climate Change Update report, which we will publish in January next year. The report states that the Arctic warms 3 times as fast as the global average. That means that we outpace the global very much when it comes to the effects of warming. And the Arctic is actually right now the best places to study the effects of climate change. Since 1979, the temperature has increased by 3 degrees. There's a severe increase in temperature throughout the season, but in particular, if I put on this slide, here you can see on the left-hand side it's the summer, and on the right-hand side it's the winter. And it's actually the winter that is getting much warmer. This directly affects reindeer herding, as you saw, through snow thaw and freezing processes. And even though we say 3 times, you have areas like around Svalbard, where the Arctic is warming up to 6 to 7 times as fast as the rest of the world. The Arctic is not only getting warmer, but it's also getting wetter. It's getting less and less snow, and more rainfall, also in winter. And we also have a higher frequency of what we call rain on snow events. Those are events where you have warm days during winter where rain falls on snow. It then freezes and creates this layer of crust, which is hard for the reindeer to dig through. Also, if you look beyond reindeer herding and, for instance, look westward to Greenland and Inuits, we do know that, for instance, the ice on the Arctic Ocean has been reduced by 2/3 since 1979. That equals an area approximately the size of India. And we lose an area approximately the size of Scotland every single year. That is how fast it goes. And if you look on the thick ice, the ice more than 5 years old, we have lost 90% of the ice since 1979. So almost all of it is gone. We have also other effects that affect both Saami, but also indigenous peoples in other places of the Arctic, like wildfires. It's been a severe increase in wildfires, in particular since at the end of, from 2015 on to today. And in those last couple of years, it's actually been, the frequency of wildfires have been increased by the magnitude of 4. So all of those effects impacts people living in the Arctic. And one of the reasons for us to do this project is actually that the climate change is happening in such a speed and to such an extent that it's also pushing the conventional science to the very reference frames of where we have the data and understanding of the mechanisms. We know what happened before, but we are now at a stage where we are really pushing the limits of our knowledge. However, we strongly believe that by combining knowledge systems like science as well as indigenous knowledge, it gives us the opportunity to focus more on, or kind of do a more higher resolution focus on what's actually happening in the Arctic, to understand better the mechanisms as well as the processes going on, for us to be able to be better able to predict the changes in the Arctic. So I just want to end with this picture. This is actually me being out providing food. What you see there is not the grocery store, but it's a lake, and it's in the middle of winter, and it's from back home. And it's a way to show how we actually are able, or should be able, to combine both the traditional way we live, as well as science and the modern way in gaining the best outcomes for future. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rödven. It's actually a lot easier to moderate this panel when you can hear yourself now that I have these headphones on. Kiito for those insights. Very, very interesting. We'll now transition into a Q&A session with Miss Retter and Mr. Rödven. Please come here up to the stage. If you have any questions, now is the time to ask those questions. We're here to answer them. Please, anything about the project, the thing at large. And I would also like to introduce you to Maaret Hätta, joining us online. If you have any comments on these issues, please feel free to ask. are we seeing, okay, gentleman over there, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Matti Kuittinen from Aalto University. I would like to ask from a map about the weather patterns, or better yet, the ocean circulation patterns. So how does it, from your perspective, look at the moment? Are we going to see a tremendous cooling in the Arctic in the future if the Northern Atlantic oscillation is going to fade away, as the latest Dutch studies indicate? Or what is your current understanding about how the Sapmi and the Scandinavia are going to change?
Thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question. I think we could go on talking about it for hours. It is very complex. We do not fully understand, and there's I wouldn't say disagreement, but the divergence in the opinions in the academic society at the moment, whether on how strong this effect will be and how quickly it will take place. We're all aware of the publication that came out just some weeks ago, and how it was picked up in media. I said, when we do our assessments, we try to assess all the information available. We do have, what we do see in academia now is we have those that really emphasize that process, and those that say that it may not be that strong. So at the moment it's some kind of disagreement. It's a bit similar to what we see. We have the same kind of discussion going on when it comes to connections between high Arctic and lower latitude weather patterns. We see the correlation, we understand some of the mechanisms, but the total picture of like the mechanistic part of it, we do not really understand at the moment. So I cannot give you the exact answer now. That would be but definitely what we do see, and just to explain, the reason why this is happening is, one of the reasons for this happening is the tremendous melting of ice in the Arctic. And the fresh water enters the ocean and makes the surface layer, and the predictions is that it will make the Atlantic current, if you can call it that, dive down earlier, causing the Fennoscandia to cool down, while the rest of the world will warm up. That is what it referred to. But still, all the parts of that mechanism it's very difficult or it's very complicated, and we still don't have a full understanding of it, and it's kind of a divergence at the moment.
Thank you, Kihto. Gun-Britt, you have reflections on this?
Yes, I have reflections on this because I was interviewing scientists like Rolf and others in the corridor yesterday, preparing for this session, in a way hoping that, looking 50 years back, and that the Arctic has had rapid changes, that have we used all that kind of amplifying factors that we saw the fast change, that it will slow down, or are there more, what is the word again, the cumulative effects that is continuing to keep this high pace in the Arctic change? So I kind of leaning towards hoping that we have seen already this like darkening of the snow cover and the ice, and that we have overcome that cumulative effects, and that the globe might be seeing now. Because we have been saying, I've been working in Arctic issues since the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment came around, and where they said that the Arctic is a canary in the coal mine, showing what will happen in the rest of the world, and that might be what we see now. So I'm kind of on the place at hoping that it will slow down in the Arctic, and hoping for this cooling effect to happen, because our culture depends on snow.
I could just to add in, often when we, from a scientist side, we talk about uncertainty. Uncertainty doesn't mean that we do not know. Uncertainty means that we're not able to pinpoint directly. And even though we talk about complexity in these, when it comes to the AMOC or the current we just spoke about, for all general patterns of Arctic warming, we are kind of straight on. Where we are missing, actually, we are underestimating the effects we've seen so far. So looking back, 20 years ago, we produced what was called the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment together with one of the other working groups, CAF and IASC, and it clearly states all of the effects we see today. But and it was regarded rather radical, because our estimates on sea level rise were much higher than those of IPCC. Our estimates on snow cover reduction was higher. But today we see that we were actually underestimating. When it comes to snow cover reduction, we only predicted half of what we see today. So that is how fast it's going. So even though when we talk about complexities and uncertainties, it doesn't mean that we do not know, but it means that we still have to figure out all the parts of the puzzle. So,
thank you. There's time for one more question, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Jeanette from Hungary, but also being a researcher in Arctic affairs and following the climate negotiations on science mainly and indigenous peoples. And what I'm interested in is how you see the future of green transition in your land in that case, if we only see the negative impacts at the moment of the manufacturing of these kind of products and also the resources from your land, and you are the main users of your land. So what's your contribution, and what's the ideal contribution of your societies to the green transition in this regard? Because I think what we are missing at the moment is we would like to know your kind of like future receipt for the green transition. However, I don't see the actions as a contribution towards it. So I would like to see your perspective, how we can implement those ideas, how we can do it better in a better way. That's my question. Sorry for the big framework. And thank you for your responses in advance.
Thank you, Gunn-Britt. Please take the floor.
Yes, thank you. That's a very complicated question. And I think our contribution is one part of the climate solution is to have intact ecosystems and nature, and our contribution to the climate solutions is to maintain productive ecosystems like we have done through millenniums or since time immemorial. So I think the indigenous people's cultures and our traditional way of life, like in particular reindeer husbandry, hunting, gathering and fishing, is a way of protecting these lands and to maintain them and to retain or keep the carbon in the system and not releasing. So, and that's one part of it. It was also a fumbling way of saying very simple things. And the other thing is that I don't think what we experience now with the green transition is that, well, at least it feels like our lands are looked upon as empty spaces because they look untouched, because we maintain them intact. So they look to us for all the solutions. That our culture is to carry all this energy production on these lands, like wind industry that is taking vast areas, and mines, but that is also taking a lot of land and even dumping tailings of this on the sea floor. So I think we need to see a more we are carrying an uneven burden of the responsibility to facilitate for green transition. So I think if wind turbines are so good, why don't the richest ones have them in their backyard? Thank you.
Thank you, Gunn-Britt. Very good question. Do you want to have a very, very...
Just to add to Gunn-Britt's answer there with some numbers, the most important thing we do at the moment is to, as you say, to maintain the ecosystem. The Arctic Ocean is our rainforest. That's where most of the CO2 is uptaken right now. But we have to ensure that it's possible to do so also in the future. Like in France, the capacity of the forest to uptake CO2 has halved for the last 20 years. We have to make sure that we maintain the ecosystems in a way that they can actually help us in doing that and not work against nature when doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. Thank you, Gunn-Britt. I will lastly hand over the stage to Gunn-Britt for some final reflections and thoughts. You have a few minutes. Use it wisely.
Yes, I forgot about that part. We had 1 minute left. Yes, I think the experience with this project has been very good. We are very happy that AMAP would like to join with us because we are one of the permanent participants to the Arctic Council, and we are invited to all tables at the Arctic Council. But we need to come into these tables with something with us in the bag, and exactly doing field work based on indigenous knowledge. And Marit just left, and trying innovative ways in how to map the challenges that the reindeer herders are facing out on the land and collect them, and together with where the questions asked are defined by the knowledge holders, not the scientists, but bringing in the scientists also to the table to try to understand the observations combined with the knowledge and with the science to come up with tools for us and knowledge that can inform recommendations in the Arctic Council, and Arctic Council being the 8 Arctic states. I think it's quite a unique cooperation and a unique fora, and where we combine from the not grassroots but the lichen to the Arctic area. And we hadn't tuned in our presentations, but I think snow and ice is so important to the Arctic and to our livelihoods. So we need to understand this, and I think this CETA project can feed into many of the Arctic Council assessments. So thank you for attending. And back to, no, you're not doing it. Thank you everyone, and thank you to Janne for moderating, and for Marit to be readily available on the screen if there was questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Please make yourselves comfortable. Grab a seat. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our event, Hopes and Expectations, as part of the Nordic reception here at the Nordic Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. My name is Aaron Taki from the Nordic Council of Ministers, and I have the honor to open this event and to introduce our esteemed panel. Today, as part of the Nordic reception, we will begin with our event, Hopes and Expectations, and this will be available on the live stream as well. And then we will continue with a reception with food and drink and the opportunity to mingle. So please do stay for the duration of the entire event. At the Nordic Council of Ministers, we have a policy that if youth are affected, then youth must be included. And this obviously includes our work here at the UNFCCC negotiations, given that the youth and the generations to come are arguably the primary stakeholders in the outcome of the COP29 conference. As a result, 20% of our program here at the Nordic Pavilion is youth-led, and all event organizers are encouraged to include youth perspectives and youth voices in their events. The Nordic reception is, of course, no exception to that. This event, Youth Hopes and Expectations, is an event that we have held previously at many COP sessions. It is an opportunity for youth to share their desires for both the outcome of the UNFCCC negotiations here and also the process in which it takes place. For example, including youth voices and minority voices as part of that process. As a follow-up to this event, and as we have done at previous events, we will also have an event on the 22nd of November at 1:15 called Youth Reflections, where we look back on the outcome and the emerging outcomes and the process here at COP29 to see how that has met and holds up against the youth hopes and expectations that are outlined today, and of course at other events at COP. There are two differences with the event this year, Hopes and Expectations. The first one being that it's a part of the Nordic reception. But the second one is that we have a special guest moderator for the event, who is the Climate Ambassador and Head of Delegation to Sweden, Mattias Frumeri. Sweden is the current chair of the Nordic Council of Ministers, so we're very grateful that Mattias can moderate our event here today. And that makes this a special opportunity for the youth delegates here present to have their voices heard directly by a senior negotiator and a head of delegation of one of the Nordic countries. So please make the most out of this opportunity. So, without further ado, I will introduce our panel up onto the stage. And as I call your name, please take a seat and take a microphone. Firstly, I would like to introduce Saruni Salsabila from the Global Coordination Team of Internal Organization and Youth Climate Forum as part of Youngo. Welcome, Saruni. An applause, please. Next, I would like to introduce Amanat Adebayo. My apologies, Amanat. NDC's Outreach Coordinator and Care About Climate and General Secretary Lead at Planetary Health Alliance Western African Hub. Welcome up on stage, Amanat. An applause. An applause. Lastly, from our youth delegate side, Antti Regelin, the UN Youth Climate Delegate of Finland. Welcome up, Antti. And then I will hand over the microphone to Mattias Frumeri, our moderator for the event, and as previously mentioned, Climate Ambassador and Head of Delegation to Sweden. Mattias, please grab a microphone, and the word is yours. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you joining here, and a special thanks, of course, to our great panel. And so we have some 30 minutes now to dive into various questions in terms of hopes and expectations for COP29. I thank the Secretariat of the Nordic Council of Ministers for organizing this early on at the COP, when we still have our hopes and expectations. Yeah. And so let's make sure that we actually can deliver on them. But of course, that would be my first question then to all three of you on your hopes and expectations for COP29. So maybe briefly also, if you could maybe say a few more words about your organization that you represent, And then if we start over on that side, so your hopes and expectations also from the perspective of the organization that you represent.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Is it on, right? Okay. So my name is Runi. I'm here representing Yongo. Yongo is Children and Youth Constituency to the NFCCC. So I believe in Yongo we have several working groups. And personally, I will be focusing in the NCQG and also NDC part. I'm from Indonesia, and previously I have analyzed the updated NDC of Indonesia, especially in the lens of equity. So I believe in terms of hope, personally I will be trying to focus in a lot of commitments, especially we are talking about net zero to 2030, a lot of commitments, a lot of words, and perhaps we are here to highlight what are the next steps and actions. I believe NCQG is one important role and also key to determine how the funds it's going to be distributed, especially from the global north and also to global south. So we would like to take accountability of non-state actors, not only parties but also non-state actors that takes the important role in here. So this is one of the hopes that are looking forward in COP29 and what is the outcome would look like. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Rumi. So let's move over to you, Aminat. What are your hopes and expectations?
Okay, thank you. My name is Aminat Adebayo, and I represent Care About Climate. I'm the NDC Outreach Coordinator at Care About Climate. And what we basically do at Care About Climate is to analyze how the NDCs include youth inclusivity and gender inclusivity in the NDCs. So the first thing, one of my first hopes is youth inclusivity in NDCs, because when we carried out analysis for several regions. And let me give an example of Africa. We realized that more than 60% of the NDCs we analyzed do not include youth meaningfully in the development and implementation of NDC processes, which is quite bad, because as youth, we are vulnerable to climate change, and also our perspective should also be heard. So yeah, first one is youth inclusivity, and the second one is also like gender integration, because NDC, when we also like carried out the analysis for NDCs, one of those things we also like found was that two-thirds of the NDCs of the analysis we carried out include women and gender in the development and implementation processes, while more than 49% do not include gender, do not include women in the implementation and development processes. And the last one is just transition. I hope that the new NDCs will include perspectives from the local people at the grassroots levels. Their perspectives will be put into consideration in the new formulation of NDCs. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So Antti, over to you. What are your hopes and expectations?
Thank you very much. So I am the Finnish Youth Climate Delegate, and that means I am appointed or selected by the Finnish Youth Council to represent the Finnish youth here in the UNFCCC. Firstly, I'd like to thank the previous speakers for excellent hopes and expectations. To me personally, I still do want the big cake of NCQG to be somehow resolved. Like, how do we fund this? How do we finance this? Firstly, I'd like to also actually ask the audience, how many of you believe that this COP will actually reach an agreement on NCQG and finance? Raise your hands if you think that this COP can reach or will reach. Okay, a few hands.
A couple of hands at least.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. The room gives me the impression that I also like have like I know we can, but it's not obvious it will, and I really do want all of us to remind ourselves like that we're here really to push for the impact, not just to have the COP. And from a youth perspective especially, I think the impact is what matters the most. And I think you also put it perfectly at the beginning that like this is also a moment where we still can be very hopeful, even if we're seeing difficult things with the agenda setting. We're seeing disagreements, but I remain hopeful and I'm ready to fight for it as well.
That sounds like an excellent start to any kind of meeting, that we remain hopeful and should be ready to fight for good outcomes. So the two of you mentioned NCQG, so let's come back to that. But I thought also you presented some really interesting statistics there in terms of your NDC analysis. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on terms of what do you see from your perspective that countries should do and could do more to ensure both that youth inclusivity, but also in terms of gender and just transition? What are your sort of top 3 suggestions for countries to do to ensure that?
Okay, yeah, the first thing I feel countries should do is actually multilateral cooperation. Like countries should actually welcome cooperation among countries, like developing countries, developed countries should meet together and ensure that, okay, we come together to actually assist the youth, because youth are actually ready, we're actually ready to actually provide innovative solutions. So, and I also one thing I also feel we could do is to ensure that we also invest in research and also enable you to gain access to resources. Because I'm a researcher and I know how difficult it could be to actually get resources. I mean, to implement research projects that could be innovative. So it's quite overwhelming. So yeah, I feel that's also a very important thing that countries could actually do, invest in youth and also invest in research or impactful projects that will be meaningful to improve the new implementation NDC that will be implemented. Thank you.
Do you have any countries which maybe stand out in terms of being able to provide a good practice in both in terms of youth engagement and gender equality?
Okay, yes, thank you so much for that. So when we carried out the analysis, what was very surprising was that the best scoring region was Africa. And we know that Africa actually faces, we are the most vulnerable. Do you understand? So yeah, and that's one. And the best scoring country was also from Africa, which was Zimbabwe. And I think there was another one, Dominican Republic. So yeah, and they were really very good with the youth inclusivity, and they were also good with the gender integration. And I feel because our youth ambassadors also gave their perspectives on what countries can do to make them better. So one of the perspectives one of them gave was that if countries can be ambitious with youth inclusivity and can also be ambitious with the gender integration, it is very possible for the country to actually reduce to meet with the Paris Agreement. So yeah, so I feel youth inclusivity and gender integration work hand in hand together. So yeah, that's my.
So a shout out to colleagues from Zimbabwe and the Dominican Republic
Dominican,
for ensuring that that
inclusivity and gender
and participation. That's great. Good examples for us all to be able to follow. Let's come back to the NCQG. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more in terms of, again, your expectations? What do you see sort of as minimum requirements in terms of the outcome here from COP29?
Perhaps I would like to highlight 2 points. The first one is clear transparency on the accountability and also the measurements on how the funds will be distributed. That's first. And then secondly is the participations of stakeholders, because that is very, very important. From the non-state actors, as I have previously mentioned, and what are the sources of the funding, how it should be tracked, and making sure that the funding itself it reach to the targeted beneficiaries and how it could be directed. Make sure that it is really implemented to the grassroots level. It connects to also implementing from the global policies and also to the domestic or national policies itself. And that is why again participation of indigenous community. For example, Indonesia, we have a lot of indigenous community. We have over 30,000 of islands that also represent so many indigenous community. So making sure that any project that receive the funding from the NCQG tracker itself, it directed to them how it just to include them as participated in the program. So that is my expectation, just to include the equity levels in the NCQG process and also the tracking, the accountability and transparency itself. So that is overall.
As a follow-up to that, what do you think that countries need to do? I mean, it's one thing what we decide here at the global level in terms of the structure of the new goal, but what do countries need to do to ensure that both transparency and accountability?
Again, I would like to highlight again on what have been already stated is the multilateral agreements, because first we would like to also highlight what are the countries have been agreed from the previous pledges and what is the new pledges. Perhaps I would like to give an example of what is currently happening. I'm personally have experience in several projects in ASEAN level, and there are European and ASEAN delegations to ASEAN levels, and this is how the funding would be collected. And one thing that I would like to point out is that the transparency is, again, pointing out that they actually reassure that within the monitoring and evaluations, there are KPIs that needs to be fulfilled by the targeted beneficiaries, and making sure that within the measurements, the monitoring and evaluation, it also includes several stakeholders reporting itself. So reporting is very, very important in these regards.
Thanks. And back to you then, Antti. Would you agree, are these also sort of your minimum requirements when it comes to the NCQG?
So, great comments from colleagues. I would maybe first like to remind everyone that we basically have, in the current state, went from the 6-page draft to now a 34-page draft, which seems that how we implement it is going to be difficult. However, I do echo here with my fellow panelists that the necessary elements to also make it a good agreement and not just an agreement for the sake of having an agreement is extremely important. However, I also do want to highlight the necessity of making it also achievable. We have to be ambitious, but for us to set systems or targets in place that ultimately, especially now that we have to acknowledge the fact that the state of the world, with the United States possibly withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, how are we going to actually find the money for it? And if we don't make it properly achievable, then we also kind of risk it not necessarily collapsing, but in a sense, like, does it fill the purpose? When it comes to the technicalities, I don't have that strong of a view on that, but I think there's a million ways that we can do it, but what we're ultimately lacking is more on the side of political willpower than us not having good enough NCQG models or NCQG implementation models that we can do. And especially now that we're here, I think us youth, and I hope that everyone else here as well, is trying to push for us to have the will to do that.
And maybe if we should dare venture into the maybe one of the big questions for the meeting in terms of the actual quantum of the goal, how much money should there actually be? As we know, the current goal is 100 billion annually. We have heard suggestions for 1,300 billion annually. Would you, each three of you, dare to say, how much would you think there should be for the new goal?
Just a short comment. I hope that's the reaction we have at the end of the COP when we reach an agreement, but I'll let the colleagues go first with the actual sum.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Sorry, yes. We've been. One of the key topics for this COP will obviously be the actual volume or the quantum for the new goal, and we've heard the suggestions for the new goal to be $1,300 billion annually. Would you have any suggestions or wishes in terms of what you want the quantum to be?
Okay. To be honest, I'm trying to be as hopeful as possible, and I guess one important thing, and also again, I guess in terms of the technical things, and we don't actually not sure what is the model for the NCQG itself, as it differs from one country to another. Perhaps my hope is that to make sure that we truly highlight for example, small island countries and several countries that is really, really endangered, that especially in terms, we have already a lot of scientific data that highlight some countries are in danger because of the sea level rise. So we would like to make sure that this total of fundings, the numbers itself, personally, I'm not sure if that is actually enough or not, or it is more. We need more to make sure that it is well implemented, perhaps to a certain level, maybe in the next 10 years, according to what year that we would like to achieve it. But just making sure that the targeted is according to what is the most urgent and crucial. And also it is aligning to each country's actions as well and pledges, because I do acknowledge that not all countries acknowledging that perhaps mitigation and adaptation is not the #1 policies, and they're focusing on about that. So I guess that's for me.
Thanks. Aminat, would you want to venture into that conversation?
Okay, so for me, I believe one size fits all cannot solve this situation. And I also believe that what we actually do with is NDC equity. The word equity is there, and I feel like each country or each region should be given what they would need to actually like address this that we are talking about. So, and I actually do not believe in having equal. I don't believe in having equal certain amount. I cannot say an amount, but then I just believe like one size fits all cannot go. And I also believe in equity. Like equity should be the watchword here.
Thanks, Ananti.
Well, at least I think we know that we have to be able to put more than what we have so far. I also, like other panelists here, I kind of don't want to just throw a number out. Yes, we've already seen, as acknowledging the global stocktake, that the amount of money that is needed for adequate transitions in multiple different fields of society is in the trillions and not in the billions. But then again, going back to my comment about if we actually pledge to have the money, then we would actually also need to provide the money. And I would rather have a very, very ambitious amount of money that we actually then even come close to achieving than having an extremely high number that we terribly fall short of, because I feel that also has the effect of diminishing our hope. Like hope is the theme of the panel today as well, and I do truly believe that a lot of people that have actually gathered here to COP are of that mindset and of that train of thought that we should put more focus on this. And how do we all influence the societies that disagree with us, and especially those who are actively pushing for such politics that maybe even undermine such development is like a terribly difficult challenge to solve. And those people or those entities, if we just throw an absurd number at them, what we might have is more pushback, and that's what I want to avoid.
I mean, maybe just sort of as a parallel to that, I mean, the position we take from the EU side is that we want to see an ambitious but realistic goal. So pushing it far enough, but still being, I mean, as you say as well, being able to deliver on that goal is also equally important. I think we need to be starting to wrap up a bit, but before we do so, I thought...
analyze the NDC in my country and how they making pledges and trying to increase from 30% of cutting emission carbons to 42%. But in terms of action, there are so many things that is still lacking. And we have a lot of participations of indigenous community, but in terms of the local levels, it is also still lacking. Personally, I believe youth, we are here to represent hope. We are here to represent the light. We are here to represent the power. And we are still wanting to feel empowered in the midst of many things that are out of our control. Perhaps just to highlight that in COP29, we hope that finally, I think I would like to highlight again for the NCQG one. It's not only just investment. It can be a lot of beneficiaries would like to be interested in these parts, but we truly hope it's not only just investment, but it needs to be a collaborative actions to all stakeholders until the grassroots level. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think it's more or less time to be wrapping up, but just sort of one final question to all of you, and that would be if you would have any recommendations or advice to all the parties here at COP29, what would that be in order for us to be able to reach the kind of conclusions in terms of hopes and expectations that you set out previously? Why don't we start with you as well?
Perhaps again highlighting equity, because equity, personally I'm right now trying to focus research on the net zero tracker and also the standards as well, and we are highlighting the importance of equity. Net zero standards is one important role to our stakeholders and also the business or corporates itself in terms of sustainability. Perhaps again to highlight about the equity, inclusion and inclusivity again for the implementations. Perhaps just highlight about that and also as a reminder.
Thanks. I mean, that sounds maybe something you would be recommending to us as well.
Yes, and to add to what she said, I also feel like inclusivity should not just be in written. It should not just be in text. It should be in actual implementation. Like we should be included, not just in text. So we are including youth, but they are actually not including youth. So we should be included because when reviewing the NDCs. Most of the NDCs that we reviewed, that is what we saw. It was stated that we included the youth, but in actual reality, youth are not being included. more than 60% of them did not include youth, but it was stated we included youth. So it should be in implementation and development of the processes of the NDCs. Yeah, that's my point.
Thanks. Antti?
I would advise to listen to the science. Very simply put. On the other hand, something I also do want to very shortly highlight is that everyone who attends COP, I really ask you to go speak to the youth and try telling them the rational arguments for why do you really think that we should or that we cannot be able to afford to save the planet, because if we don't, it's going to be so much more expensive, so much more deadly. One thing that's also like separates me from these earlier points that I really want to also point out is that what's hard to see here at COP sometimes from us youth is the feelings of genuine dread. I notice here sitting in this panel, like, I know I'm trying to put forward like a professional presentation to you all, but what's really, really, really hard to put forward is the actual grief, the terrifying feelings that so many of us here and our generation actually feel. And when we talk to them, I don't know how to give it to you that you would also internalize the actual terrible, terrible grief of the young generations that necessarily aren't even yet born and don't know what's even left for them.
I think that's a sobering reminder to all of us. Thanks, Antti. And maybe just as a personal reflection on that, last year for COP28, when we were writing our Prime Minister's speech for the national statement, I asked my son, who's now 18, to have a look at it, and he's like, you need to be more alarmist in terms of what we need to do. I think that sort of very much reflects also your sentiment here. And I do think it is sometimes a challenge for us, as civil servants, to be reflecting that alarmism in a way which sort of also presents us with pathways forward. Because of course we also want to present solutions, and not only sort of the challenges we have, but also present solutions into what we can do to resolve the climate crisis and make sure that we all can deliver on the commitments that we've taken upon ourselves in the Paris Agreement. But thanks so much for all your reflections and your input. I think all of what you said in terms of inclusivity and ensuring that youth voices are heard, but also reflecting the urgency of climate action that we're all facing in various ways in our various countries. And thanks also to the Nordic Council of Ministers for hosting us here today. And I think a big round of applause to our panelists for sharing their perspectives here today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to our panelists, Runi, Aminat, and Antti. This concludes the on-stage content of our event here today. Thank you for joining us here on the live stream. Please join us again for the Youth Reflections event, which will